Well, hello, I'm Les Miller. What I'd like to do today is basically a follow-up video to the previous one I've done on how the prophecies of Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 17, and Luke 21, yes, 21, are what I like to call multi-level prophecies. If you've seen that video, I mentioned and described on a number of Bible verses how what Christ said to the disciples just before he went to die on the cross in that week was a description not just of the destruction of Jerusalem, but also of the corruption of the Dark Ages and the final end of the world just before the second coming. I had mentioned the way you can tell the interpretations are correct is the fact that there's a harmony between them. But I'm wondering if I really made enough of a connection with fulfillments 1 and 2 and fulfillment 3 in the sense of the Abomination of Desolation. I made a declaration that a Sunday law by the United States is the Abomination of Desolation. Now, as I've mentioned, Seventh-day Adventists, we've been teaching that, we believe that, and I could show you lots of Bible verses, but a lot of our big-name speakers, Doug Batchelor, Mark Finley, Dwight Nelson, many others, they do that, and we're doing seminars all around the world, so I don't really feel the need to go over that in detail on any of my channels. What I want to do is kind of talk not only what the truth is, but why the truth is the truth. And that's the focus I'd like to have on this video. What's the background? How can we know for sure that this interpretation is correct? Because how can we see the principles being played out? We should cover the verses though. So, because we're talking about big things of history, I thought this time I would use my souvenir 1611 King James 400th anniversary edition, the facsimile version. My wife gave me this back when they were having the celebration, and you know what? It's really special to me. So we'll get those three verses. Abomination of Desolation. That is Matthew 24, 14 and 15. And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations, and then the end shall come. When ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet stand in the holy place, whoso readeth, let him understand. Mark 13:14. But when ye shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing where it ought not, let him that readeth understand. Then let him that be in Judea flee to the mountains. I think those are very important words, standing where it ought not. And I'm hoping as we go through the different lines of reasoning in this video, it becomes obvious what that real meaning is there. Luke 21 gives us the local fulfillment only, not the fulfillment over history, and not the final end fulfillment. But that is Luke 21, verse 20 and 21. And when ye shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies, then know that the desolation thereof is nigh. Then let them which are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let them which are in the midst of it depart out, and let not them that are in the countries enter therein too. Now I discussed in the previous video how at the destruction of Jerusalem, the Christians physically left the city when the Roman armies surrounded it. They understood Christ's prophecy. They were interpreting prophecy correctly, significant thing to say. And they escaped. Not one Christian died. And the Jews, of course, who weren't interpreting prophecy correctly, they stayed. Now, our next verse, which is Revelation 11 and verse 2. But the court which is without the temple leave out, and measure it not, for it is given unto the Gentiles, and the holy city shall they tread under foot 42 months. I've come to realize, in further pondering this topic, what I had said about the union of church and state being the harmony between the multiple levels of fulfillment needs just a little bit more correction, a little bit more refinement, because it's a cause and effect situation. The effect is the union of church and state. The cause, as stated here, is that the outer court of the temple was given over to the Gentiles. What does this mean? It's symbolic of the church. The church is the temple. And this is the invasion of the church by the world. All right, hi. Just like last time, we're going to do some break-ins here over by the history posters now, because we're talking about history. From Daniel 2, Daniel 7, Daniel 8, the time prophecy, and the history going back and forth. I had studied the Reformation in high school, secular high school. So when I became an Adventist, went to these Revelation seminars, I just knew it was true. So the invasion of the church by the world here, where did we see this? The spiritual compromises over the generations. And what developed was Catholicism, as is common knowledge today, a hybrid religion, a mixture of Christian and pagan, and things people fought wars over during the Reformation on both sides. Things like transubstantiation, worship of Mary, and all these different holidays that the Catholic Church had in their calendar. Even though most of us keep Christmas and Easter, Protestants don't recognize anything else. Some ways religious peace is good, of course. Some ways, well, history's going to repeat itself. Now there's a pattern that we can see from the Old Testament that has a lot of similarities to the New that we can understand also applying to our time. Israel would flirt with the false religions of the neighboring nations. They would not keep true to God. They would worship these other idols. And then they would be taken over by those same nations. After a certain point, after they've suffered enough, they'd cry out for a deliverer. God would raise one up. There'd be a revival. He'd give them a victory. Now let's look at John 11:48. This is the Jewish leaders, the things they said in council as they were planning to put Christ to death. If we let him thus alone, all men will believe on him, and the Romans shall come and take away both our place and our nation. And what happens at the trial that Jesus is going through with Pontius Pilate? The Jewish leaders, what did they finally get pushed into saying by the situation? But they cried out, away with him, crucify him. Pilate said unto them, shall I crucify your king? The chief priests answered, we have no king but Caesar. So here we have a clear situation. Jesus was the deliverer. Jesus was the revival worker. But his version of revival was far beyond anything they could even think of. He wasn't there to save them from the Romans. He was there to save them from sin. He was there to advance the plan of salvation and get ready to take it to the whole world. And when push came to shove, that wasn't the kind of revival they wanted. All right, let me read you Ephesians chapter 2, verses 1 and 2. And you hath he quickened, who were dead in trespasses and sins, where in time past ye walked according to the course of this world, according to the prince of the power of the air, the spirit that now worketh in the children of disobedience. Cross-reference that with what it says in Daniel 12 about how Michael, the great prince, another name for Christ, is ruling over the sons of your people. Sons of your people were the Christians. Now I keep going over this time and time again in video after video. I hope nobody's getting sick of me, but the phases of world history go back to over here. Adam and Eve to Noah. God shows how bad things get under sin. Israel's history, right there. We're given a chance to try to do all the do's, don't all the don'ts, obey all the rules, and human beings show they can't do it in their own strength. Christ comes, does for us what we can't do for ourselves. World history continues. Why? Application of the cross. He has to show he can do it in us. Plus, the world has to be shown and told and known. God is working through human beings as they are. They had horses. They didn't have social media. The message went out slowly, but it went out in century after century. Church history, a repeat of Israel's history. We get into the modern day. First phase of the judgment began 1844, which coincides with the upswing and changes in our modern world. The modern world began about that time. That's where evolution, that's where communism comes from, etc., etc. Now, we go back to the early days of the church. The sons of disobedience that I just talked about, contrasted with the sons from Daniel 12. These were the political Jews, the Jews who weren't willing to advance with Christ and understand the change from the old to the new covenant and be part of the church as it replaced Israel. And they were still trying to create another Old Testament Israel. They made the Christians look bad in the eyes of the Romans. And that's why the Romans were persecuting the Christians then. We also go back a little bit further, right to Paul, before he was Paul, when he was still Saul. He got to go to Damascus and try to kill the believers there because the Jews were bribing the Romans. We had two sets of people who disagreed with each other on all kinds of things in this world. But when push came to shove, those who were truly committed to Christ, who were willing to follow into the new phase of the plan of salvation, the two groups against them joined together. The old idea, my enemy's enemy is my friend. Remember, though, Jesus told us to love our enemies. America's history is also a repeat of Old Testament Israel's history. The way the Articles of Confederation were set up, the way the Constitution that replaced it was set up, the early days of the United States, the states themselves were to hold the balance of power. The federal government was to represent them internationally, but loosely hold the nation together. And so it parallels the time of the Book of Judges. Book of Judges ends with a civil war fought because one woman, a concubine, was gang raped to death, and she was basically therefore a sex slave. The U.S. fought a civil war over slavery. I remember an American friend of mine telling me one time that after the Civil War, that's when the federal government started to take more control. So we see a parallel there to the time of the kings. As for persecution, America being the free country that it has been and sending the message of freedom and democracy to influence other countries in the world, that aspect of it isn't quite the same. They went and settled their West by the same narrative that the Old Testament has of Joshua and the people going to the Promised Land. The thing they call the manifest destiny. They believed it was God's will that they stretch out their republic across the country. Interestingly, this famous picture I've got on screen now, that woman that's representing the wagon trains going west from the area of light to the area of darkness, she doesn't represent the Christian church taking the gospel west. She represents the American Republic taking the ideas of the French Enlightenment to the natives in darkness. One of my favorite books that my mother-in-law gave me for a Christmas gift back in 1991, I was fairly new in the church, the Illustrated Great Controversy. All the standard writings from the book, but also reinforced with pictures from different places around the world, different points of history. One thing they showed in the book there was a relief carved into the wall, one of many decorations behind the judges of the U.S. Supreme Court. You've got a figure there holding a copy of the Ten Commandments, but its knee, that person's knee, is blocking the first four, exposing only the last six. This is the formula. This is what made the United States the most successful nation the world has ever seen. And this is why they rose up to the place of power they have today. And this is what Israel could have been if only Israel in the Old Testament had been faithful. There is actually Bible support for religious freedom when you contrast Elijah at Mount Carmel. The fire comes down. He says, kill all the false prophets. He was able to do that. Daniel too. Daniel's in front of Nebuchadnezzar. Nebuchadnezzar wants to kill a whole bunch of false prophets. Daniel pleads for their lives. Why? Israel was supposed to be a theocracy. Once that crown was removed, according to Lamentations, it was never to return. That's why Jesus said his kingdom was not of this world. So while we as believers are scattered among the nations, and that's Jeremiah 29, we are to be good citizens and we are to support those around us, even if we don't agree with them on faith issues. Moral issues of the last 6 commandments, if you understand the first 4 rightly, you will be able to understand how to apply the last 6 to issues like abortion, gay marriage, gun control, and anything else debated by people today with their liberal and conservative mindsets. We've got to take the analogy of church history being a repeat a little further as well by talking about New Testament applications. John 4, and also Jesus' story of the Good Samaritan. We have to look at people outside the Christian world like the way he treated the Samaritans. So the Good Samaritan could be the good Muslim, could be the good Buddhist. And I've got to add one more analogy as well. Let's go back to the story of Elijah on Mount Carmel. What were those false prophets doing as Baal worshippers? The ancient pagan religions around Israel were so offensive to God because they practiced not only human sacrifice, but child sacrifice. And take a look at abortion today. You're sacrificing your future to get what you want now. That's what Baal worship was about when they killed their firstborn. And that is what people are doing. Now, I'm not going to sidetrack this whole thing into a specific abortion debate. Once again, let's expand the philosophy. If we're going to view those outside the Christian world as Samaritans, we have to view the left as the equivalent today of the Baal worshippers. They're outside the faith. In all my years interacting with people of other faiths, especially evangelical Christians who, like Seventh-day Adventists, believe in the born-again message and believe in the cross and the value of the atonement, one of the reasons I think that they find what we believe so strange is because they don't understand the background framework that Adventism is based on versus what their theology is based on. We believe, essentially, God has raised us up to finish what he started with Martin Luther. And the pattern and the process of the Old Testament kept on going through the Dark Ages. It keeps on going in every generation because human nature is the same. God raises up a deliverer, a revivalist, shall we say, in our Christian era. And people at first accept the message. But then, little by little, here and there, little compromises come in. Happens in the lives of individuals, happens on a church-wide basis. They compromise to get popular. They compromise to make the message easier for themselves, but for others to accept. And this is where we get the takeover of the church by the world. When this is near complete, he raises up a new revivalist, and this time, there's a test of obedience because there's some sort of new message of truth, some sort of detail that the revivalist is preaching that basically is God's way of trying to reverse the compromise. Mark chapter 15 and verse 14. Then Pilate said unto them, Why, what evil hath he done? And they cried out the more exceedingly, Crucify him. The Jews who wanted to crucify him were pushed into the situation by Pilate's question. Then they were forced to admit they have no king but Caesar. then they were forced to admit they were referencing and orienting their worldview around this life only, just as I've said in video after video after video. But that question is so important. Why? What evil has he done? When the tares are persecuting the wheat, when bad religion is persecuting good religion, it happens in front of a wider world. And what will happen at the end of time, this is the cause that everything will be based on. All those outside the realm of God's people, all those outside the Christian sphere, whether they're secularists living in westernized countries, or whether they're Buddhists, Muslims, Hindus in other countries, they'll all be looking to this situation, and they'll be forced into a position where they will have to choose. Which side are they on? Are they on the side of bad religion, or are they on the side of good religion? Okay, we'll start the final break in here by reading Hebrews 10:38. Now the just shall live by faith, but if any man draws back, my soul hath no pleasure in him. This is going to be a tough one, but I've got to say what I've got to say. We saw there the just live by faith, so righteousness by faith is what it's really all about. But when you get chances to grow in grace and you decide you don't want to, then it's God who's saying, you're essentially turning away from me. So are you going forward in faith then? The first phase of the judgment beginning in 1844, the significance of these last truths from the Reformation needing to be proclaimed, like the true Sabbath and the truth about death. The preaching of these truths is causing a divide within the Christian world spiritually, and it's leading in a cause and effect way to divide the world politically as well. Because if you reject these truths and you draw back, what are you doing? You have to find something else to substitute for it instead. When God was raising up the Adventists, giving them their calling, there were other revival movements that came up out of America. Two different ideas were being taught by different groups. One, the Ten Commandments have no place in salvation. And two, doctrinal differences between churches don't matter. The love of Jesus is all you need. Once you decide you want to stay back, keep Sunday, you have to adopt these two beliefs in order to reconcile your faith. But it's this watered down Christianity that got watered down further in generation after generation, till, as I said recently in a sermon in my local church, till we saw the baby boomers give up on Christianity completely, turn to the ideas of the left, the ideas of the French Enlightenment, and try to build the world we have today, a world filled with abortion and gay marriage. Let's go back to the book of John. Those who were worried about losing their nation ended up saying, we have no king but Caesar in the end. Will this be the repeat of world history? Will this be the way the world ends? Now, just so you don't think I'm trying to say that Seventh-day Adventists are better than other people, I want to read you some quotes from our prophet, Ellen White. Seventh-day Adventist Bible Commentary, I get the first quote. This is volume 4, page 1184. God has jewels in all the churches, and it is not for us to make sweeping denunciation of the professed religious world, but in humility and love present to all the truth as it is in Jesus. So may I plainly and clearly say I am attempting humility and love. I hope the tone of my voice and the look on my face will show you I'm trying to kindly say prophecy is being fulfilled. With the things happening in the news right now, with the way the right in America are pushing to take their country back, maybe, just maybe, we are going to see the Sunday law very soon. Let's get the next quote. It's from Evangelism, page 173. We are not to pass judgment on those who have not had the opportunities and privileges we have had. Some of these will go into heaven before those who have had great light, but have not lived up to the light. Like Christ said, he had other sheep not of this fold, and he said to Paul that he had many people in Corinth. What the church is supposed to do by preaching the message is draw those people out. And the preaching of the message, the Seventh-day Adventists have been called to preach, and the gifting of God to take us to all the world. It's going to be the fulfillment of Matthew 24:14. This gospel is the one that includes the true Sabbath. The false gospel is the one that includes the false Sabbath. We'll get our last verse here. Matthew chapter 13 and verse 30. This is from the parable of the wheat and the tares. Let both grow together until the harvest. And in the time of harvest I will say to the reapers, gather ye together first the tares, and bind them in bundles to burn them, but gather the wheat into my barn. What I want to focus on there as I wrap this video up is let both grow together. It's not just individuals and your character as you adopt ideas that are right or wrong. It's over the whole course of world history. These issues playing out, these cause and effect situations playing out, they'll finally come to their fullest fruition, their fullest growth, once the entire Christian world has expanded to the rest of the world. In other words, in our time, we'll see the full development. Not just that everybody everywhere will have to make this decision between good religion or bad religion, but that bad religion will be as bad as it can be, and good religion will be as good as it can be. And that is where I get the idea that I've also said in other videos. At the end of time, one group calling themselves Christians will be willing to kill for Sunday. One group will be willing to die for the Sabbath.